Hello, and welcome to another edition of Ask the Expert. We're talking today about pollinators, specifically what's buzzing and not buzzing about pollinators. We're joined today by two F&R alumni, Megan Benage, who's the regional ecologist with the Minnesota DNR and a 2005 wildlife science major, and Bee Redfield, who is a current research fellow and also a 2005 Purdue alum. So today, like I said, we're talking about all things pollinators. We're talking about the who, the what, the how, as well as how you can help. And we're also going to talk about some of the cool products that you get from pollination, and also some of the current research that's going on, which kind of is Megan's MO. She's kind of a big deal, an Emmy winner dealing with pollinators. So we'll let her talk about that a little bit later. So throughout the broadcast today, if you have questions, please put those in the comments section on Facebook, and we'll have Megan and Bee answer those throughout the broadcast. And if we don't get to them, we'll get to them after the fact. So to get us started, I'm going to toss this over to Bee and let her talk a little bit about the different types of pollinators.
Thanks, Wendy. I'm going to start out by sharing my screen, and we're going to go over a few slides that give background information on pollination and pollinators, so you can kind of better understand the process of pollination, and then that helps you to understand the types of plants, flowers that you could have in your garden to attract pollinators, which I know is something that a lot of people are interested in. So can everybody see my screen? All right, so getting started. So the process of pollination, for those who don't know, is the way that plants get fertilized with genetic material from other plants. So it's a process that needs to be done in order for them to produce seeds and fruit, the things that we eat off of plants, but it often requires animals as a vector to do so. So some plants use wind or water, but many also need animals. And because of that, plants and animals who kind of have co-evolved develop certain traits to attract certain animals to certain plants and vice versa. So you see here in these pictures, there's two birds who, these are Hawaiian species. They're responsible for pollinating some Hawaiian plants and trees. And you can see they co-evolve. The bird here on the right, it has this long hooked beak that is easily able to kind of get into the flowers here and get to the nectar, and also then can pick up the pollen and distribute it to other flowers as it moves along. And then the bird on the right has these feathers on the top of its head that kind of gather up some of that pollen. And then as it moves along to other flowers, it dispenses it onto different trees or plants. So these unique traits, when you're talking about the plants themselves, the flowers, we call it pollination syndrome. It is the development of certain shapes, colors, fragrances that attract specific species of animals to the flowers or plants. So that's what I'm going to talk about next. So birds are one of our pollinators that are probably most well known. You can see here a little hummingbird, something that people love to have in their gardens. And on each of these slides, you're going to see this color spectrum along the bottom of the slide, and that tells you the colors that these birds prefer in their flowers. So birds tend to like red, orange, and white. Hummingbirds also will try out purple flowers, as you can see in the picture here. They like flowers that have a lot of nectar in a funnel or cup-shaped flower, and most birds, hummingbirds being not a good example since they can hover, they're going to need somewhere to perch. So they're looking for flowers that have a nice perching space. And birds are not really too picky about how flowers smell, so the fragrance aspect doesn't really come into play for them. Butterflies and moths, another popular pollinator. And these guys tend to like more bright colors like reds, yellows, also purples. Whereas moths, they prefer those same colors, but just duller, not as bright shades. And they, if you've seen the butterflies, they kind of have these long, like tongue type appendages that come out and get the nectar. So they like nectar in long, narrow tubes if they can find flowers like that. And they do appreciate a landing pad that they can kind of sit on while they take the nectar. And they actually do like the scents. So if you smell flowers, they're probably trying to attract some sort of insect, like a butterfly or a moth or a bee. So they like sweet, fresh scents. And moths prefer flowers that emit their scents at night. Bees, on the other hand, they like bright whites, yellows, and blues. Bees can't see reds. So if you see something that's red, it's probably more likely some different type of pollinator, although this one here is in a pink flower, so that's not the greatest example. They make use of something called a nectar guide. So some flowers have colors that we can't see that are ultraviolet spectrum, and bees can see them. So it kind of directs them into the area where they need to land in order to get to the pollen and nectar. They like flowers that have mild, pleasant scents, and they like the challenge of kind of getting into a specific type of flower. So if they're tubular or C-shaped and they figure out how to climb into one type of flower like that, they'll move from flower to flower once they've kind of figured out how the puzzle works and they can get into it. And one last interesting thing about bees, they have something called buzz pollination, certain types of bees. So some plants, for example, eggplants, potatoes, tomatoes, and smooth Solomon seal, which is a wildflower around here, they release their pollen more easily with specific type of buzz. So the bees will fly in and use a vibration to release that pollen and so that they can get what they want out of the flower, and the flower recognizes that, and the pollen comes out easier. So I am going to pass it off to Megan next, and she's going to take over the next couple of slides.
Perfect. Thanks, Bee. Hi, Purdue friends. Hi, pollinator friends. Super excited to be talking to you today about bees. What's more exciting than that? I don't really know. I can't think of anything. So bees as pollinators. I want you to type in your guesses, figure out how many bees, different kinds of bees, do you think we have in North America? And if you're listening from Minnesota, how many do you think that we have in Minnesota? I apologize. I did not do my Indiana research, so I don't know how many bees we have in Indiana. What a fail on my part. Purdue grad right here. Sorry about that. So put your guesses in there. I want to know. And then I'm going to tell you. So bees are one of our most important pollinators, and there's a reason for that. So they are actively collecting both pollen and nectar, which means that they're not just in it for the nectar, they're not incidental pollinators, they're really doing the work, they're collecting pollen. And they also do something really interesting when they collect pollen. It's something called flower constancy. So when they're pollinating and collecting that pollen, they go from the same species to the same species to the same species. So if it's purple prairie clover pollinating time, please say that 10 times fast, purple prairie clover pollinating time. If they're doing that, then they're carrying purple prairie clover pollen from one purple prairie clover to another, which means they're doing what? They're pollinating. That's what they're doing. Otherwise, they'd just be wasting pollen if they took it to a milkweed or something else, because that pollen doesn't match up with that species. So bees are super cool. They also have branched sticky hairs on them, which means that the pollen, they're designed to collect pollen. So I don't know what your guesses are, but I'm going to tell you the answer. There are over 4,000 different kinds of wild bees in North America. 4,000! When I did this presentation in one of our counties here in Minnesota, I asked them how many bee species they thought we had, and somebody guessed 10, and I said higher, and a kid in the front row said 8. That kid needs some more education. That's for sure. We were going in a wrong direction. So I hope that if you were guessing that you guessed somewhere close, and if I was to say to you, go higher, that you would really guess more than 10. So in Minnesota, we have 450 different kinds of wild bees, and they're all doing these intricate, amazing tasks. All right, Bee, if you want to advance, that would be great. This is actually really interesting. So we have lots of other pollinators. Like I said, bees are the most important, not just because my co-host Bee is named me, but because they have those branched hairs, and they're collecting pollen and nectar. So we have other pollinators. Flies is one that's always surprising to people. You can thank a fly for your piece of chocolate. Chocolate would not be possible without a tiny fly that pollinates cacao. So thank you, flies. And we also have bats, beetles, ants, and sometimes wasps. Usually wasps, because they don't have sticky hairs, they might collect some pollen, but most of the time they're doing something even just as important. They are predators in the pollinator world. And so predators kind of get a bad rap, but we need them to keep those tricky insects in balance and make sure that they're providing a healthy system for everything else that's in it. And in Minnesota, we don't have bat pollinators because all of our bats eat insects and they don't actually nectar. So they're fun fact from Minnesota. Next, please. I should like signal you or something like, okay, anyway. So I'm gonna talk about bees some more just because they are super duper important. And I like to do it in pictures because I'm a very visual learner. So hopefully this helps you. But bees are responsible for everything interesting that we eat. I just had watermelon for lunch. Okay, granted, that's not a super balanced lunch, and I apologize for that. But I am very grateful for a bee because I wouldn't have enjoyed that delicious watermelon without one. So everything interesting we eat. Sometimes kids, when I give presentations on pollinators, they try to trick me and they say things like, well, pizza's not because of a pollinator. Wrong, that cow probably ate some alfalfa and then you milked that cow and then you made cheese, which went on your pizza. And tomatoes are buzz pollinated, just like Bee mentioned, by bumblebees. They're one of the only bees that are big enough to do that. And then kids are always really disappointed. They're like, dang it, she got me again, that pollinator lady. So everything interesting that we eat is because of a pollinator, even your morning cup of coffee. God bless those bees. So a couple other things that bees are doing for us. So they're definitely that crop production, right? But over 80% of our flowering plants need an animal pollinator. So not just bees, but animal pollinators in general. So we need them for our blooms. A good way to think about kind of the food aspect, if you look at those two pictures, the bottom pictures, one shows a market and our lives with pollinators, and then the one that's much more empty, it's on the right on my screen. I hope it's on the right on your screen, is our life without bees and other pollinators. It's a pretty scary look at what our market might look like. I don't know about you, but I need fruit in my life and I need tomatoes in my life. So pollinators are really important. Here, I'm going to make my gesture. That's my slide advance gesture. Okay, you might have to click here so that some of these other plants show up. I don't know what was going on. So a couple things that you can do. Everything you do matters. Every little bit of habitat helps. But there are a couple plants that are bee magnets. So there's a study that was put out by Harmon and Threat. I'm a scientist. I love studies, right? So they found that these 4 species, the golden Alexanders, the purple prairie clover, my favorite, the gray-headed coneflower, and then lead plant are 4 plants that when they're available in a planting, bees tend to visit them more often, and lots of different kinds of bees visit them. So if you're looking to add a little patch of bee heaven on your property, you would want to plant these 4 plants. The other thing that's really cool about that is our very own University of Minnesota Bee Lab is doing some similar research, and they found that those same 4 species popped up here in Minnesota as being incredibly important. And then they also had a few additions. So any of our late season asters, stiff goldenrod, stiff sunflower, and something called false sunflower. And I'm pretty sure that most of these are also Indiana plants too. And then one thing that's usually surprising to folks is that pollinators aren't all about flowers. A lot of times in their larval stage, they need grass or they need that grass to create space so they can get bare ground so they can nest. So some of my favorites are little blue stem, prairie dropseed, and June grass. And if you happen to be near the Purdue campus, you are a very lucky person because Purdue has done a great job, especially around the forestry and natural resources section of campus, of converting those to little native pocket plantings. And you'll see a lot of prairie dropseed in the Purdue area, and it smells like buttered popcorn. Indiana, popcorn, bees, pollinators. This is just like me. Marriages, wonderful, happy marriages. All right, go ahead and do our last slide here. So there's a couple other things that you can do. Start noticing insects. All of these little things make the world go round. They really do. And if we don't start paying attention to them, they're going to be gone before we even realize how important they were. Again, think about how your day went today. Don't tell me the bad stuff, but what did you eat? That's all connected to this act of pollination. What did you see? Hopefully you saw something blooming and you can thank a pollinator for that. So start to notice them. Plant more flowers and native grasses and sedges. We need them. Every little bit of habitat helps. And then also, as you're driving around, try to look and see, what does your landscape look like? Are there flowers blooming? Is it mostly lawn? Is it mostly agriculture? What's going on? Because every choice we make, it's not about taking something away necessarily. It's about making sure we get back in balance. And then learn. It's grassland month in Minnesota. Have some cake, celebrate some bees, tell people about everything you're learning today on this Facebook Live event, and go discover even more about the prairie and pollinators. And there's a couple of resources up on the screen here that'll help you do that.
Thanks, Megan and Bee. That was a great introduction to all things pollinators. I guess let's talk a little bit. We talked a little bit about bees, but one of the things people have is they're afraid of bees and wasps and things like that they have in their yard. Should they be? Is there ways that they can attract the pollinators but protect themselves and their pets, etc.? So, Bee, do you want to take that one?
I would be happy to take that one. So when it comes to bees, I would say you shouldn't be afraid. There are certainly folks who have an allergy to bees or to wasps, and those people need to be a little bit more careful. But you actually, statistically speaking, you have a better chance of being killed by lightning than you do by being killed by a bee. So it's very unlikely. And the people who have allergies, taking extra precautions, carrying the EpiPen, not going out alone during the seasons when bees are especially active. But the average adult, just to give you an idea, if you were not allergic, you can safely withstand more than 1,000 bee stings at one time. So while they hurt, they're not going to kill you. So I don't know how they figure that out. I wouldn't want to be a part of that research, but 1,000 bee stings. And one other statistic I found was that about 600,000 deaths, as compared to about 80 deaths a year for bees, 600,000 deaths a year are contributed to mosquito bites and the diseases that are carried by mosquitoes. So when you're talking about a flying bug that is dangerous, it's the mosquito, not so much the bee. In terms of keeping yourself safe, in terms of keeping your yard more safe from insects that sting, you can keep food covered when you're eating outdoors, especially sweet things like soda and fruits, and then cleaning up if you have fruit trees and the fruit is dropping, making sure you clean those and dispose of them right away so it's not bringing in yellow jackets and the like, and keeping all your garbage in tightly sealed containers. One thing I think I've seen plenty of people do, and I'm probably guilty of as well, is if a bee or a wasp flies at you, you're not supposed to wave your arms and run away screaming. You should protect your face and then slowly move away. The rapid movements, the swinging at the bees, that can actually provoke an attack, especially if you trap them against your body. So just slowly move away. They're probably more scared of you than you are of them. And same goes if you have one fly in your car window, slowly pull over. A lot of people actually get injured or killed because a bee flies in their car and they freak out. So it's going to want to get out. It's probably going to stay by your windows. Just pull over, stay calm. If you're going outdoors for a picnic or a hike and you want to make sure that bees are not following you around, keeping in mind the things that I talked about that attract bees, things like sweet scents, bright colors. So probably skip the perfume, the hairspray, the really sweet suntan lotion. Those scented items are going to attract bugs to you. And also, you think of beekeepers, they wear white. They're not wearing bright yellows. They're not wearing flowered prints. There's a reason for that. So if you wear white or those lighter colors, they're not going to be as attracted to you. So one last thing I wanted to mention, if you do get stung, I know there's a lot of different ways that you can treat it. Anecdotally, people do all kinds of different things with the sting. Just make sure you wash your hands really well. A tip that I can have is if you're stung on the hand, which is where I tend to get stung, if you have rings on, take them off right away, because that actually can cause some damage if your fingers swell up and your rings are trapped on there. And then you can use ice packs and over-the-counter antihistamines help me with that. So all of those things pretty helpful, but I would say, be cautious, but don't be afraid necessarily of bees and wasps. Unless you're allergic, then just keep those EpiPens close.
Megan, anything you want to add to that? You're around bees quite a bit with your work. Have you run into any issues?
I can honestly say the only time that I've ever been stung is when I stuck my knee right into a nest. And that was I mean, obviously, if a giant stuck its leg through your house, there's going to be some freaking out that's going on. So I would say another thing, and Bee gave a great overview of all the things you could do if you're stung and to make sure that you're being safe and protecting yourself. Another thing is try to space out the habitat. Like maybe you don't plant the native plants in an area where you normally play in your yard, or you're going to be tossing the ball or rolling around in the grass. Another thing is that bees are really docile and they're not interested in you. They're interested in doing the work that they were designed by nature to do. So they're interested in collecting pollen and nectar so that they can get about the business of raising their young so that they can make more baby bees. And so the best thing that you can do, like spatially try to design your habitat, maybe so that you have less interaction with them. But I can also tell you, my neighbor here in Minnesota is definitely allergic to bees. And my yard is like a bee mecca of plants and flowers and all kinds of things. And she told me the one time, she's like, well, just keep the bees on your side of the fence. Unfortunately, I don't have tiny leashes at my house, so I can't do that. I can't lasso them and just, come here, little bees, let's walk you around. It doesn't work like that. But I can tell you, even having all of that habitat right next to her, she doesn't ever even see bees because they're in my yard collecting the pollen and nectar that I'm providing for them. And even when I'm recreating and hanging out in my yard, I'm not stung either because, again, they're trying to avoid me.
Great information from both of you. And I've posted some links to the Bee Lab info at the University of Minnesota to talk to you about stings, and also a Pollinator Alliance No Stings fact sheet on pollinator.org that you can go to as well to learn more about stings. Let's switch gears a little bit here. We talked about how to bring the pollinators to our yards and the different things like that, but Megan, tell us a little bit about some of the research that's going on and the things that are going on out there, especially in regards to solar, which is, I know, a thing that you've been really heavily involved with, including some legislation that's happening.
Yeah, I'd be happy to talk about that. So I'm not a bee researcher, I'm an ecologist. So what that means, I always, whenever I go to school groups, right, I ask them, what's an ecologist? What do they do? And I have to tell a story because it's ridiculous. So one time in the front row, this kid raises his hand all the way up high and he's like, I know what an ecologist is. I'm like, all right, kid, tell me, what do I do for my job? And he's like, you study the economy. Nope, that's not it. That's not it. So we had to do some work there, some more education, which is important. Had to let them know that I study the parts and pieces of an ecosystem and how they're all interacting with each other. But it's not a term that most people know. I think even some of my family has no idea what I do. They think I'm just skipping in a prairie all day. So we have fantastic bee researchers at the Minnesota DNR. They're invertebrate ecologists. And then we also have bee survey folks who are working to put together our bee list. And so sometimes I get to assist them with their surveys so that we can know how many bee species we have so that we can begin to understand all of these important things that they're doing. Because if you think about it, 450 different kinds of wild bees in Minnesota. We really understand the honeybee, which is, I should have mentioned earlier, which is actually managed as livestock. So honeybees are regulated by USDA, just like a cow or a chicken. And so they are something that's moved around to help with pollination. But wild bees are doing all kinds of pollination all on their own, and we're not moving them around or doing anything like that. And so we want to make sure that we create space for both wild bees and for honeybees. So because I work for the Department of Natural Resources, our work is all focused on wild bees. And so again, trying to understand all of the things that they're doing and the roles that they play, because it's pretty important to have pollination so we can have things like, oh, I don't know, clean air, clean drinking water, flood control, healthy soils. These are pretty important things that are definitely connected to my life. But I will tell you, even as an ecologist, I don't take enough time to stop and say thank you and think about how those things relate to my life. So some of the other research that I do, much of my work is based in restoration ecology. So how do I build prairie ecosystems back, which is super hard. Let me just tell you right now, it's hard. Prairies were built perfectly the first time. There are thousands of organisms that occur in them, especially if we start looking in the soil, and then we're talking billions. And so to understand how all of those connections are happening and what they're all doing to make a system healthy, that's a challenge. And so I'm trying to understand how pollinators are interacting with those prairies and build them back. Here's a good analogy. So it's kind of like you're building a Lego, but you lost half of the instruction manual and most of the pieces are somewhere under the couch and you swear that they were there yesterday, but you have no idea where they went today. You can't find them. And you're trying to figure out which piece you actually need in order to build it. So that's some of the restoration work I do. But then Wendy mentioned solar. I am so excited about this. This might be when I finish my career out, when I'm 106 and I'm creakily walking across the prairies, talking to the bees. I hope they're still here. I'm going to do my darndest to make sure that they are. I hope that this is a legacy that lasts. So some of what we started here in Minnesota, my coworker, Kevin Mixon, and I, we were just chatting across the cube one day and he said, you know what? Minnesota is scheduled to have this huge increase in solar installations. And most of the time when we install solar energy, it's a panel and then underneath it's turf that's mowed. And so he was like, what do you think if we put pollinator habitat underneath there, which is just another fancy way of saying we're going to build a prairie, a kind of a makeshift prairie that has lots of wildflowers in it. But it's really, we're trying to do a prairie planting is what we're trying to do that supports pollinators. We want to make sure we get the balance between our grasses and our sedges and our wildflowers just right so that it does a really good job of that. And I just looked at him and I said, Kevin, that's a brilliant idea. How do we do that? So here in Minnesota, we were able, all good things happen through partnership. So we were able to work with another state agency, our Board of Water and Soil Resources. We were able to work with the Public Utilities Commission and then with Rob Davis and his crew over at Fresh Energy. So kind of bringing in all the pieces, right? Government, not-for-profit, industry, and figuring out ways that we could all work together to make a better outcome. So here's a great way to think about it. Do you just want to have a solar installation that does one thing, produces energy, or do you want to have a solar installation that produces habitat, produces a potential foraging area for honeybees, and then once you get those, it could also have foraging area for sheep. So now you're not just supporting one industry, you're supporting 3 industries if you've got bees and sheep out there because you've got grazing and honeybees. And then it just spiraled into this even crazier thing where, of course, we're in Minnesota. It's a long winter. We got to know what to do with ourselves. Now we're making beer with honey in it from solar facilities. We're making wine. We're making cake. There are all kinds. So we've got restaurants in St. Paul here over in Minnesota who are using that honey that's produced on these solar facilities. So it just creates this really perfect storm of stackables where instead of getting one thing, energy, you get all of these other benefits. And all the while, our goal was just to make pollinator habitat. We didn't really know that there were going to be all of these other partnerships and industries, pardon my pun, that blossomed out of this. I can't help myself. Okay, sorry. There's times, whatever. I'm laughing at myself. It's fine. So all of these partnerships blossomed. I said it again. It's been just really great. And one of the coolest things about it is we got a phone call from Indiana a little bit earlier this year, and they said, hey, we want to adopt your pollinator friendly solar standard, Minnesota. How do we do that? And we said, well, you work with people, you talk to them, and you show them that it's just good sense. Because in the long run, here's what we're finding for the solar industry as well. Not only do they not have to mow now, so in the long term, their maintenance costs go down, But neighboring landowners are happier about this because instead of just seeing kind of a fenced in area that looks very utilitarian, they're seeing flowers and grasses and things that are pretty and make you happy. So that's really good. And then from a practical standpoint, having those deep rooted plants on site is actually showing to keep the panel cooler, which is making it more efficient. How crazy is that? We didn't even know that would happen. We just wanted to plant flowers and grasses. So it's one of those things that I'm really excited that Indiana has picked it up. I believe Duke Energy just installed their first pollinator friendly solar site. We've got of the 4,000 acres or so in Minnesota that have been established recently, we have about half of those that are pollinator friendly solar. And so that's really exciting. We have local communities that are starting to adopt ordinances to make it something that happens at a county level, because from a permitting standpoint, we only are commenting or whatever in charge of commercial solar projects. So projects that are generating 50 megawatts of energy or more. So anything that's smaller than that, like your local, maybe you have just one panel or two panels, that would happen on a county by county basis here in Minnesota. So it's really exciting to see them adopt the pollinator friendly standard, and we're just getting it all across the board. And if you want to learn more about that, Prairie Sportsman, which is a great media outlet here in Minnesota, they did a fabulous pollinator friendly solar episode on it, and it's an Emmy award winning show. And so that's why Wendy introduced me as an Emmy winner, because I had the pleasure of participating in that show, and they just show all of these partnerships and how everything's working. And it's just a great way to make good things happen. And I'm so proud that it started here in Minnesota, but we could really selfishly say it started at Purdue, where I got all of my education and knowledge to take that to Minnesota. Thanks, Purdue.
Thanks, Megan. We got to always give a shout out to the alma mater. In an interesting article, as you mentioned, Indiana developing a lot of solar areas. In the Indianapolis Star last week did an article about a project in Logansport, and the article mentioned that there are 20 states that have pollinator-friendly solar projects going on. So, you know, what may have started in Minnesota, or maybe you stole it from someone else, I don't know, but is becoming a trend. And so that's definitely good to see. But Bee, I want to kind of take it the other direction here. There's some challenges that come along with pollinators. What are some of the challenges, especially conservation-wise, that pollinators are currently facing?
Yeah, there's a lot of challenges, and some of them are similar to the challenges that lots of species are facing, things like climate change, reduction in habitat, habitat fragmentation. So that occurs when the habitat is cut off by things like roadways going through, or just developed manicured lawns, so they can't get easily from one area to as easily from one area to another. You probably heard a lot about pesticides, something called colony collapse disorder. Penn State did a study, and there's 70 plus types of pesticides that they were finding in bees and pollen. So that really has an impact. If you do organic gardening, that helps a lot of different animals, not just bees. And just general pollution impacts pollinators. Going back to climate change, the reason why that impacts pollinators is it disrupts the timing of the relationships in ecosystems. So when you think of animals that migrate, like birds, for example, and you think about the timing of certain flowers blooming and the animals coming in and needing to have certain flowers that they usually help pollinate and then also get food from, if those timings are off because of climate change, because of weather changes, that can really hurt both species. So all of that is really important and having a negative impact. One other thing too is the invasive species. That's another impact that it has is on pollinators, because when non-native vegetation comes in, it might not provide the same food or habitat, but it does tend to spread really rapidly, and then it kind of can overtake the important plants that these animals need. So I know we know about things like milkweed for monarch butterflies, keeping those planted, using native plants in your garden. That just provides the habitat and the food that these animals need and brings them to your garden. So it's a win-win both ways.
Awesome. to both of you, I guess we talked a little bit, we're talking a lot about research and things that, the pollinators themselves, but I guess I want to shift it. First of all, if you have questions, put them in the comments section. I've also placed the link to the story that we did about Megan's Emmy Award, and that has the link to the Prairie Sportsman piece in there, as well as to Megan's podcast, the Prairie Pod, that you can listen to, which I know Bee boned up on after setting up this pollinators piece. But some great stuff in there, and a bunch of other resources that can teach you a little bit more about pollinators. But what specifically can I do? I guess that's where I want to kind of take this right now to both of you. How can we help pollinators, and not just by planting pretty flowers in our yards, but what are things I can do to help both ecologically as well as to help the individual creatures?
Okay, I'll go first. I wasn't sure if you wanted to go first or not. I was trying. That's the Minnesota nice. They've trained me well. I was waiting so that you can go first. So definitely.
I was also waiting.
You're also waiting. You well trained from your Minnesota roots. So, okay, wow. Anyway, no, you go first. No, you. So most importantly is to start noticing insects. I can't say that enough. We only know about 20% of our insect diversity. That's all we know. And the scary thing is the things that we do know about, we're seeing an overall trend of 40 to 45% declines overall, with some groups obviously tanking a lot more than others. And a simple way to think about this, if the research numbers and the stats are kind of bogging you down, how many times have you had to clean your windshield off recently? How many times, like when I was a kid and we would travel across the country with my parents, hi mom, hi dad, we would definitely have to stop at the gas stations, and my brother and I would have to fight over who was going to get to squeegee the windshield off. I can't remember the last time I had to do that. And that's a good just visual, also because it's a windshield, indicator of how bad things are getting and how much we need to do. So definitely contributing to the observation. There's lots of citizen science opportunities that you can participate in. There's something called the Bumblebee Watch. There's the Monarch Watch. There's ways that you can track pollinators and actually contribute to the science surrounding them so you can help people learn. Another thing, and planting flowers is a really important one, so I don't want to forget about that. But most good things for conservation happen because of citizen advocacy. When we clean up rivers, when we protect land, that's all because you say you want that. That's all because you stand up and you say, I'm a person and I recognize that pollinators are important. Here in my town that I live in Minnesota, we have this amazing lady called Deb Steinberg, and she has brought the charge forward that she is going to make New Ulm, Minnesota a pollinator-friendly city. She is talking to our city council and trying to make it something that they adopt. You have the power in your hands as a citizen and an individual with how you vote, how you spend your money, and how you spend your time to make these things count. And I guarantee you, even if that sounds like a lot of work, it is going to pay off in the long run for you in ways that you might not realize, like your morning cup of coffee or your chocolate break when you're hangry. Those are all reasons why these things matter. And so every little bit you do can help. In Minnesota, we're very lucky. We have what's called the Clean Water, Land, and Legacy Amendment. It's a voluntary tax on the citizens here that they voted for. Overwhelmingly, it passed. And that gives us the dollars that we need to protect more land so that we can do better, both for our ecosystems and for all of the different kinds of wildlife, including pollinators that live there. And so your advocacy in this matters. We clean up the land when we do it together, and it starts with you.
That's hard to follow up. Agree with all those things. I will just add, I know we both talked about the importance of planting native flowers. Also keeping in mind that you should try to plant a variety of different colors and shapes of flowers. That way you can attract the different types of pollinators. So you know about the different colors that attract the different animals. You also want to plant flowers that bloom at different times of year. So you get that nectar and pollen throughout the growing season instead of just having all spring bloomers and then nothing to eat the rest of the year. And one other little tip is pollinators need water too. So you can provide little sources of water, whether it be bird bath or even just like a shallow stone that kind of collects a little water so they can get a drink while they're in your garden too.
I can't believe I forgot to say diversity. Oh my gosh, ecologists fail. Thanks, Bee, for bailing me out. Diversity, not just in your flowers, but in your native sedges and grasses that you plant. Super important for pollinators.
I got your back.
And I placed a link from the Purdue Extension Education store about planting native flowers for pollinators. So if you're in Indiana and you want some suggestions, that link is in the comment section. Again, if you have any questions, I know that they've done a great job talking about all of the pollinator species, as well as what that means and what they do and things we get from pollinators. But if you have further questions, definitely put those in the comment section and we'll get to that. Megan, I have to do this. Tell us about murder hornets. I mean, should we be concerned? Is this a thing? Like, I mean, are they going to come after me? Are they pollinators? What do we know?
Just a second, I got to take a drink of my beverage. Murder hornets! Oh my gosh, stop panicking. Everybody, do this with me, please. Take a deep breath. Hold it, let it out. Oh my gosh, don't we all feel better about the murder hornet? I know I feel better. Okay, here's the thing. I know it's been a hard year, okay? I know there's been a lot going on and it's been a struggle. We're in this together. We're not hermit crabs. We don't eat our sick or young, right? So we need to make sure we're lifting each other up. And when one little snippet of sensational news and we think we're suddenly in the Hunger Games in real life, the tracker jackers are here. I promise you that is not the case. Here's the facts. We've had 2 sightings in 2019. One was dead. Another was destroyed in Canada right away. So this is not something to panic about. This is also not the first time that an invasive wasp has been seen in the United States or in North America. This has happened before. And in fact, with murder hornets, which I hate that name, it's a terrible name because it automatically makes you terrified. The only show that I know that has murder in it that doesn't make you terrified is Murder, She Wrote. And that's an amazing show. So try to, when you think murder hornets, just think Jessica Fletcher and you're going to be fine. Okay. Be soothed by that analogy. So the good news is that people are on it. We track the packages that come here. We're constantly looking. There are laws that protect us, that make sure that we cannot transport invasive species. And so we do our due diligence there. Some of the things that you're hearing are correct. They definitely can attack honeybees. And I know that it's very startling. But one thing I want to point out is that in a normal part of their life cycle, they hunt individually. And it's only when they get towards the end of the year and they're desperate, they are a wasp that feeds on meat. So again, a lot of our wasps are predators. And so we tend to, as people, not have great relationships with predators. I remember when I worked out in Cape Cod and we would do these boat surveys with folks and we would come back in and there would be a couple of fishermen on the edge and they'd say, how many seals did you see today? We'd say, I don't know, 1 or 2. And they'd always say 2 seals too many. So the thing that you have to remember is that while we might feel that way about predators, they're actually playing a really important role in the ecosystem by keeping things in balance. They keep horticultural pests in balance. They keep other insects in balance so that we don't have other things that would be actually more dangerous for us get out of check and out of sync. So the other thing to think about with murder hornets is they're an apex predator. So while they might be something that is sensational news, we're definitely, I can't reinforce this enough. There's not necessarily a lot of them because they're an apex predator. And I'm going to give you this analogy that was actually from an entomologist in British Columbia, where that was the other spot where they found and then subsequently destroyed one murder hornet, or just like one patch of them. And he basically said, if it was a sunny day and it was hot, would you think twice about going to swim in the ocean because somewhere in that ocean there are orcas swimming? No, you wouldn't. I know the people who are watching this and they're like, I'm terrified of the ocean. I don't know what she's talking about. But seriously, most of the time, if you're going to swim in the ocean, you're not going to be concerned about being attacked by a killer whale. So I want you to think back to some of those stats that Bee gave. there are similar kinds of stats for how likely it would be that you would get stung by a murder hornet. So again, we're not in the real life Hunger Games. Stop freaking out. Take your deep breath. Smart people, entomologists are definitely on it. And I know the other thing, I forgot to say this, murder hornets don't exclusively hunt honeybees. So if you're thinking, oh my gosh, this is going to be a really big problem for our honeybees, they're definitely looking for easy targets when they're at that end of the cycle and they're just trying to make sure that they provide for their young. And so that's when they go after those easy targets like honeybee hives. They also go after yellow jacket nests, which might be something that you're excited about. So, or might be something that you're not excited about. Again, even though yellow jackets are native, they're one of those wasps that's really good predator. They keep those pests in check. So I just want you to remember that. We also have other invasive hornets that are already in the United States, and they're slightly smaller than the murder hornet, and we basically, obviously we try to control them just like we do with most invasive species, but they haven't been terribly disruptive. So the thing that I think you should keep in mind is be aware of what's going on, but also try to put it into context. 2 does not make an invasion. 2 sightings does an invasion or an all-out assault on the United States. That is not what this equals at all. So again, deep breaths. It's going to be okay. Swim in the ocean, go for a hike. You're going to be all right.
Thanks, Megan. I hope everyone feels a little bit better about that. As we wrap up today, Bee, any final thoughts on pollinators, resources for people, anything you want to share that maybe we haven't covered as we look to promote pollinators and the wonderful job that they do in bringing us all of our favorite things?
Yeah, I'll just kind of share a little bit about why you should care so much about pollinators. Obviously, we've already discussed the role they play in food production, and just to kind of put that into perspective, about 80% of the plants that we use for food and for the plant-based products like fibers in our clothing, spices, a lot of medicines, beverages like Megan mentioned with coffee, 80% of them require animal pollinators. So if you think about that, that is about 35% of our global crop would not exist if we didn't have pollinators anymore. So that's about $3 trillion a year of global value that the pollinators bring to us for free because they're wonderful. And obviously they also, being plants, they are taking carbon out of the air and putting oxygen back in. So that's all ties back into that climate change thing. So that's another thing that pollinators do. So just keeping in mind how important they are, they should matter to all of us because we really can't live without them.
And Megan, any final thoughts as we wrap up today's session?
That was beautiful, Bee. I also just want to mention, in case people miss this point in everything that we're saying, but we lump pollinators together because it's easier to do so. But again, we only understand or have described about 20% of the insect diversity. So pollinators is this huge group of insects. It really, really is. And they all have different needs and biologies and life cycles. So there's no one size fits all when it comes to taking care of all of them. So the best thing that you can do is make sure that you're providing diversity, connecting the natural pieces of the landscape so they have those corridors to travel, and also making sure that you're using less pesticides and that you're talking to people, wait for it, about what the bees need. Like, that's really, really important. And if you want to learn more, this shameless self-promotion, but if you want to learn more about how things are all connected and my work in the prairies, you can definitely go check out the Prairie Pod. Thanks, Wendy, for putting that link up. Season 3 is airing now. We just launched our first episode earlier this week on Mussel Mania. And some people were like, how are prairies and mussels connected? I don't understand. You're gonna have to listen to find out, because everything really is interconnected. And just like Bee said, coffee, chocolate, all of those things, we wouldn't have them. An even more important way to maybe visualize what it means to have 80% of our flowering plants requiring an animal pollinator. A world without pollinators is truly a world without color. That's not a world that I want to live in. So if you don't want to live in black and white, you should care about these things.
Well, great. Thanks, Megan. Thanks, Bee. I hope everyone learned a lot about pollinators. I know I did. And now you know what color of plants to put out in your garden to attract different types of pollinators. Who knew that birds and bees and all those people were not colorblind, or they had preferences. Also learn to wear light colors, and the bees will leave you alone, hopefully. So thank you, Megan. Thank you, Bee. This was incredibly fun. Next week, we're back, same time, same channel, 3 p.m. next Thursday. We're going to be doing Wildlife Mythbusters. We're going to have Brian McGowan and Rod Williams talking about all things Mythbusters, like, you know, do bats really suck blood, and are hellbenders and salamander and mud puppies really the same thing, and all kinds of different things. So bring your best wildlife myths and we will bust them for you. It should be a good time. So same time, same channel next week, 3 p.m. Thanks for joining us today. Hope you had a good time. I know we did. So thanks, Bee. Thanks, Megan.
Thanks, everybody.